even we ourselves deceive ourselves. Now, those two things juxtaposed together really create an issue. They create a problem for us human beings. And that is that we are easily deceived. We are easily duped. We even do it to ourselves. And the thought somehow that we are able to control our situations in life is really ludicrous. Because we don't have the ability, we don't have the resources, we don't have the power, we don't have the insight, the wisdom that we think we do. And because of that, we create problems for ourselves. And I'm not talking about just us here in this room. I'm talking about everybody in the world, humanity itself. Our psalm today we're looking at is Psalm 53. If you want to turn there, I encourage you to. Let me read it for us first. It's only 6 verses, but don't be fooled by that. I'll still try to take at least 2 hours to explain it. I'm just kidding. The fool says in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt, doing abominable iniquity. There is none who does good. God looks down from heaven on the children of man to see if there are any who understand, who seek after God. They have all fallen away. Together they have become corrupt. There is none who does good, not even one. Have those who work evil no knowledge, who eat up my people as they eat bread and do not call upon God? There they are in great terror, where there is no terror. For God scatters the bones of him who encamps against you. You put them to shame, for God has rejected them. Oh, that salvation for Israel would come out of Zion, when God restores the fortunes of his people. Let Jacob rejoice, let Israel be glad. Now, some interesting things about this short psalm. It's not the first time that we have seen it. We've actually, you may not remember, although I'm sure all of you can vividly remember every sermon that I have delivered on the Psalms up to this point. And if so, you would have caught right away that there is a sameness to this psalm. In fact, if you turn to Psalm 14, and I have them here parallel so you can see it, you'll discover something rather interesting. It's almost exactly the same. What is going on? Psalm 53, Psalm 14. There are some differences, most specifically in verse 5 of Psalm 53. And so if you go to the next slide, you'll see that parallel there between verse 5 of Psalm 53 and verse 5 and 6 of Psalm 14. Psalm 14 has one more verse than Psalm 53. That's because they add this second part, which they call verse 6. Now, that's not what the writer of the psalm, that's what David did. That's what the publishers, the people who are put together the translations, they are the ones who put in the chapter divisions and the verse divisions, so on and so forth. But you'll see that there are samenesses here and some differences. And what scholars believe probably has happened is Psalm 14 came first. It was the psalm that David wrote. And whether David took it and adapted it or whether other priests later on did that, in either case, they basically took the same message in Psalm 14. But in Psalm 14, it's more focused on the individual. And in Psalm 53, now it's focused on more of a corporate focus. He talks about God scattering the bones of those who oppose his people, which is a symbolic, it's a figure, if you will, of speech, a metaphor for completely making somebody or some group of individuals or something totally, insignificant. It's that same picture that, if you remember, the prophet Elijah, when God took him to the valley of dry bones. It was a battlefield where people had fallen, hundreds and hundreds, and their bodies had just decayed away, and the bones were left bleached in the sun, picked clean by the the birds and the animals. And what does God do there with Elijah? He creates for himself an army. He creates for himself a group of people just by connecting the bones. I mentioned Thursday to the guys that I meet with, as we looked at this psalm, that's really where we get our song. Hip bone connected to the whatever else it is, bone, leg bone connected to the hip, whatever. You know that song? You've sung that song as a kid, right? That's what it's talking about, is that very event that took place. That's not an inspired song. It's just a fun song that's brought in there. So we think that that's probably what's going on here. But the message is still the same in both Psalms. But what is that message exactly? Let me give it to you in a nutshell. Dismissing the presence of God in life leads to total corruption. He starts off in the Psalm 53, the fool says in his heart, there is no God. The fool. Why is he a fool? Because he dismisses God's presence. That's really the first general statement. And then the psalmist will take from the second half of verse 1 all the way through to the end of verse 3 to really describe what is happening to the persons who do this. What are they like? Well, he says they're corrupt, doing abominable iniquity. There is none who does good. God looks down from heaven on the children of men to see if there are any who understand, who seek after God. They all have fallen away, and together they have become corrupt. There is none who does good, not even one. Now, if some of these verses sound familiar to you, they should. Paul uses Psalm 53 and Psalm 14 in his letter to the Romans, in Romans chapter 3, verses 10 through 20, where he strings together a whole list of Old Testament passages to bring to a resounding climax what he has been talking about in terms of human beings' total depravity, our sin condition. And he quotes these Psalms. And what the psalmist has been saying here is if you discount God, if you dismiss him in life, then you have left yourself open to complete and utter foolishness, complete and utter decay, complete and utter corruption. And so that's what happens when we dismiss God. But then the psalmist in verse 4 does something interesting. He kind of poses a question. It's a rhetorical, but it's also a question that is very practical in nature. And basically the question is this: how can people dismiss God? He says, have those who work evil no knowledge? I mean, they're not seeing creation, they're not seeing God at work in the world, who eat up my people as they eat bread and do not call upon God? It's a practical question. It's a good question. How can they just dismiss God? Well, he answers that by really saying, here's why that is so stupid to think about, just totally dismissing God, because the inevitable end awaits them. Verse 5 tells us, there they are in great care where there is no terror. That's difficult, a little bit difficult verse to translate in Hebrew. But the thrust of it probably should be more, in terms of our understanding, like this. They suddenly experienced terror when they thought they had gotten away with it. When they thought that they were safe, they were fine. They did this so long ago and God didn't do it. Now suddenly, boom, they're having to deal with it. You know, Jesus made an interesting comment. He said, all the things that have been done in the dark will be brought into the light. He was really referring to this, that there is no injustice that doesn't get dealt with in the holiness of God. Praise God that we as Christians have already had that taken care of in Christ's death on the cross. But that is the reality of what's waiting for everybody. Nothing that has been done that is of sin, of selfishness. Nothing escapes God's notice. It may not get dealt with right away. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But God will deal with it. And then he goes on to say, for God scatters the bones of those who encamps against you. We talked about the picture there of just creating an insignificance. And he puts them to shame because he has rejected them. But then he adds at the end this statement of hope. Verse 6, oh, that salvation for Israel would come out of Zion. Now, when he says that, it's not like he is questioning, oh, boy, I just wish that would happen. Oh, boy, I hope that. It is a statement that is made out of a sincere sense of trust and security in the nature and character of God. It's kind of like, as a kid, when my birthday was coming up, thinking, oh, I hope Mom makes something really good, or I hope I get a really good present. I hope I have, well, yeah, I hope that, but, I said that out of a sense of, they've always done that, and it's going to happen. So he says, I hope so, that salvation would come out of Zion. When God restores the fortunes of his people, let Jacob rejoice, let Israel be glad. Notice the juxtaposition of, oh, I hope, which is what it sounds like he's saying, versus when this happens, they're going to rejoice. It's a for sure. It's a sense of security, a sense of assuredness. Now that's Psalm 51 in a nutshell. Which really, when you think about it, does it really talk to us as Christians today? I mean, is there anybody in here that, if you're willing to risk it, would raise your hand to say, I really don't think there is a God. There is no God. Anybody? Did we lose, did it burn out or did it just get hot? Oh. See? Satan knows something's coming, all right? Anybody would say that? I don't think so. So really, what does Psalm 53 have to do with us? Does it have anything for us? Well, listen very carefully. When we believe that God is, yet live as though he is not, we become fools and open ourselves up to corruption. Here's the reality of us as Christians. We can believe that God is, but yet still live our lives, especially when we encounter struggle, as though he is not. Until we absolutely can't stand it anymore, then maybe we'll run to him. And when we have done that, we become fools. Because in essence, what we are saying by our actions is there is no God in this situation. It's important we understand this. I've got a movie clip, and now that the thing's back on, this is a movie, it's called Waking Ned Divine. It's a short clip. I have not seen the entire movie, so I'm not necessarily suggesting it to you as an option. I think it was PG-13, so please don't watch it, and if it's something really bad, say, well, the pastor really likes this movie, and he told us to watch it. I'm not saying that. But I did run across this clip, and I thought, you know what, this demonstrates something about us that I think it's kind of funny, so it's a little bit entertaining in that respect. Just take a quick look. Bring my apple tart. I don't know, I like that. The reason I showed that is for this reason, to demonstrate we have the ability as human beings to convince others and ourselves that we really are in control. We know what's going on. And we're gullible, so we can sometimes get away with that, right? So the temptation is when we struggle with things, and we all do, is to try to deal with it ourselves. To forget that God is present. That we need to depend upon him, trust him. Now, I know sometimes some of you think, well, I probably have it all together. God's blessing and acceptance. And so they said, well, then, if they can't get into heaven, how can anybody do it? And of course, Jesus replies, well,